She moved him. Not the way he had beat off the baby's ghost, all bang and shriek with windows smashed and jelly jars rolled in a heap, but she moved him nonetheless. And Paul D didn't know how to stop it because it looked like he was moving himself. Imperceptibly, downright reasonably, he was moving out of 124. The beginning was so simple. One day after supper, he sat in the rocker by the stove, bone-tired, river-whipped, and fell asleep. He woke to the footsteps of Setha coming down the white stairs to make breakfast. "I thought you went out somewhere," she said. Paul D moaned, surprised to find himself exactly where he was the last time he looked. "Don't tell me I slept in this chair the whole night." Setha laughed. "Me? I won't say a word to you." "Why didn't you rouse me?" "I did. Called you 2 or 3 times. I gave it up around midnight, and then I thought you went out somewhere." He stood, expecting his back to fight it, but it didn't. Not a creak or a stiff joint anywhere. In fact, he felt refreshed. Some things are like that, he thought. Good sleep places. The base of certain trees here and there, a wharf, a bench, a rowboat once, a haystack usually, not always bed, and here, now, a rocking chair. Which was strange because in his experience, furniture was the worst place for a good sleep. The next evening, he did it again and then again. He was accustomed to sex with Setha just about every day, and to avoid the confusion beloved shining caused him, he still made it his business to take her back upstairs in the morning, or lie down with her after supper. But he found a way and a reason to spend the longest part of the night in the rocker. He told himself it must be his back, something supportive it needed for a weakness left over from sleeping in a box in Georgia. It went on that way and might have stayed that way, but one evening after supper, after Setha, he came downstairs, sat in the rocker and didn't want to be there. He stood up and realized he didn't want to go upstairs either. Irritable and longing for the rest, he opened the door to baby Sug's room and dropped off to sleep on the bed the old lady died in. That settled it, so it seemed. It became his room and Setha didn't object. Her bed made for two had been occupied by one for 18 years before Paul D came to call. And maybe it was better this way, with young girls in the house and him not being her true-to-life husband. In any case, since there was no reduction in his before-breakfast or after-supper appetites, he never heard her complain. It went on that way and might have stayed that way except one evening, after supper, after Setha, he came downstairs and lay on baby Sug's bed and didn't want to be there. He believed he was having house fits. The glassy anger men sometimes feel when a woman's house begins to bind them. When they want to yell and break something or at least run off. He knew all about that, felt it lots of times, in the Delaware Weaver's house for instance. But always he associated the house fit with the woman in it. The nervousness had nothing to do with the woman, whom he loved a little bit more every day. Her hands among vegetables, her mouth when she licked a thread end before guiding it through a needle, or bit it in two when the seam was done. The blood in her eye when she defended her girls, and beloved was hers now, or any colored woman from a slur. Also in this house fit there was no anger, no suffocation, no yearning to be elsewhere. He just could not, would not sleep upstairs in the rocker, or now in baby Sug's bed, so he went into the storeroom. It went on that way and might have stayed that way except one evening after supper, after Setha, he lay on a pallet in the storeroom and didn't want to be there. Then it was the cold house and it was out there, separated from the main part of 124, curled on top of two croaker sacks full of sweet potatoes, staring at the sides of a lard can, that he realized the moving was involuntary. He wasn't being nervous, he was being prevented. So he waited, visited Setha in the morning, slept in the cold room at night and waited. She came and he wanted to knock her down. In Ohio, seasons are theatrical. Each one enters like a prima donna, convinced its performance is the reason the world has people in it. When Paul D had been forced out of 124 into a shed behind it, summer had been hooted off stage and autumn with its bottles of blood and gold had everybody's attention. Even at night, when there should have been a restful intermission, there was none because the voices of a dying landscape were insistent and loud. Paul D packed newspaper under himself and over to give his thin blanket some help, but the chilly night was not on his mind. When he heard the door open behind him, he refused to turn and look. "What do you want in here?" What do you want? He should have been able to hear her breathing. I want you to touch me on the inside part and call me my name. Paldy never worried about his little tobacco tin anymore. It was rusted shut. So while she hoisted her skirts and turned her head over her shoulder the way turtles had, he just looked at the lard can, slivering in the moonlight, and spoke quietly. When good people take you in and treat you good, you ought to try to be good back. You don't. Sethe loves you, much as her own daughter, you know that. Beloved dropped her skirts as he spoke and looked at him with empty eyes. She took a step and could not hear and stood close behind him. She don't love me like I love her. I don't love nobody but her. Then what you come in here for? I want you to touch me on the inside part. Go on back in that house and get to bed. You have to touch me on the inside part, and you have to call my name. As long as his eyes were locked on the silver of the lard can, he was safe. If he trembled like Lot's wife and felt some womanish need to see the nature of the sin behind him, feel a sympathy, perhaps, for the cursing cursed, or want to hold it in his arms out of respect for the connection between them, he too would be lost. Call me my name. No. Please call it. I'll go if you call it. Beloved, he said it, but she did not go. She moved closer with a footfall he didn't hear, and he didn't hear the whisper that the flakes of rust made either as they fell away from the seams of his tobacco tin. So when the lid gave, he didn't know it. What he knew was that when he reached on the inside part, he was saying Red Heart, over and over again, softly and then so loud it woke Denver, then Paul D. himself. Red Heart, Red Heart, Red Heart. And that was an excerpt from the novel Beloved by Nobel Prize winner Toni Morrison. Legendary Toni Morrison. Well, hello. How's everyone doing? This is another installment of the Derek Thinks podcast. Excuse me. I altered the name a little bit. I had some time to think about it. Well, I had this name in mind for a while, but hadn't really committed to it. Had this name in mind for years, but I hadn't really given much thought until very recently when I started this podcast. Currently drinking some green tea. So, this is the second episode of the Derek Thinks podcast. I'm Derek, or you can call me Derek Thinks. Well, that's what I go by on certain social media, I guess. But I chose a name for this podcast, and this, as I mentioned, it was a name I had in mind for a very long time, called The Insomniac's Graveyard. Now me, I'm a pretty restless guy, sleepless as well. I don't get much sleep, as I talked about on my last podcast. But I don't know. It's interesting. Insomnia is interesting. Of course, a lot of people relate it to things like anxiety or depression or a whole host of things. Maybe overthinking, the inability to sleep. But I called it, or I had the name Insomniac's Graveyard in mind because insomnia, people who have insomnia, at least in my experience, they kind of live differently. They kind of perceive the world differently, or I can assume from my personal experience that I perceive life and the things around me differently than other people who are more restful. It's like every day morning when the sun's up, it's like you're coherent, right? That's normal. It's normal to be coherent, but at the same time you kind of feel like you're in a daze. where, or like a fog, where things maybe aren't loud enough or clear enough, but you're there, and you know it. Or aware. I feel aware, but at the same time, uh, in a way, kind of detached from everything. Where not necessarily like an out of body thing, but like maybe in a more of out of mind thing, where you see and know and smell and feel, but at the same time you're detached from it all. You're there, but not entirely. That's how I feel. You know, um, and in my experience, or or I guess maybe many people's experience, late at night, say 2 or 3 in the morning, you're a lot more open. That's why the people have those heart to heart talks with their significant others or their good friends at 2 or 3 in the morning. Those late night phone calls. People are more willing to open up. And the same goes for insomniacs, except for it's more often, I guess you could say. Um, but it's also at those periods of time early in the morning. They say 2 or 3 in the morning that you let your heart speak. You don't do a lot of mind speak, but a lot of heart speak. You don't let your you don't do a lot of thinking before speaking. You just let it out, straight from the heart, right? But at the same time, when you do a lot of thinking, if you do a lot of thinking, uh, in my experience, again, I'm only talking from my experience, and you may relate as well. When you do a lot of thinking late at night, without sleep, tired as all hell, but still awake and aware, but detached, coherent but in a daze, your thoughts kind of get buried, you know. And I guess that's where the graveyard part comes in. Your thoughts get buried. It's kind of where they go to die. Oftentimes, never to be brought up ever again, or remembered ever again. So that's the Insomniac's Graveyard, and that's this podcast, hosted by me, Derek Thinks. This is a roundabout way of me trying to explain why I changed the name, or why I've revealed the name that I've had in mind for a very long time for this podcast. Um, yeah. So let's see. I wanted to talk about, or to kick off this podcast talking about loneliness, but in the previous podcast, I talked about insomnia and in particular sleep aids. Ways to help you relax, wind wind down, and possibly have a restful night's sleep. I've talked to a couple of friends since my last podcast, and they have seemed to uh, be undergoing their own bouts of insomnia, often brought out by things like stress and life events, etc. So, like I've mentioned before, I've tried it all. I've tried everything, or mostly everything. Um, but there are few more things that I've tried that help me relax. Maybe sleep, but not necessarily sleep, but maybe they'll help you relax. Um, something as simple as changing the position with which you sleep. Like you got a lot of side sleepers, back sleepers, even front sleepers, people that sleep on their stomach, and maybe it's creating maybe although maybe comfortable, maybe creating some issues for you which prevent you from getting restful night's sleep. I've mentioned in the previous podcast about changing your sheets, but maybe also changing your pillow or pillowcases. Something maybe full of maybe something with that Tempur-Pedic stuff that molds to your body. I know they sell like memory foam pillows. And that may help. I had one for a while, but it was a little bit too stiff, so I went. Currently I use a softer pillow, which is more comfortable. But maybe you like your pillow a little bit stiffer. It's all about that head and neck support. Also, a lot of restlessness or sleeplessness comes from breathing issues. Of course, you have like sleep apnea and etc. Or sleep apnea, or like say you have like a congestion or whatever, right? Something as simple as those nasal sprays or breath strips before bed, to open up your airways. Those can help. I do snore from time to time, and those breath strips do help prevent waking up in the middle of the night, because typically, when I do wake up in the middle of the night, which is most nights, to be honest, but when I do wake up in the middle of the night, I it's hard to go back there. It's like, well, that's it. You've had your sleep. That's my body telling me that, at least it seems. Um, but you could try those breath strips. Just to clear the airways. Make sure you're getting enough oxygen when you sleep at night, and prevent just interruptions. They may help. Um, as well as something I never even thought about, but I did try last year, was essential oils, like things like lavender and chamomile. I'm in the last podcast I mentioned chamomile tea, but even chamomile essential oil, as well as lavender essential oil, it can promote calm and restfulness, and may help you have a restful night of sleep. Um, you can get those essential oils almost anywhere, and then you can apply. Well, you mix it with a base oil, like coconut oil, or what's the oil called? Jojoba oil, jojo ho jo something right, like a base oil, right? Um, or like and a couple drops in, say, like a teaspoon of the base oil, because if you apply the essential oil directly to your skin, it can create a rash, or chemical burn. But say you mix the couple drops of the oil in the base oil, and you can put it in certain points, like um, uh, where you'd put fragrances such as cologne, or perfume. If you're going out somewhere, you can put these essential oils in the wrists, or the neck pulse points. That's what they call. You can apply them to the pulse points, such as the wrists, or the neck, or maybe even the chest as well. Of course, because it's an oil. I mean, you may wanna. You do risk staining your clothes if you wear clothes to bed, or your sheets or whatever. But that's it. It helped me. It helped me to an extent. With aromatherapy. For many people probably think it's BS, but I don't know, something about I mean, certain smells take you places, right? Like say cinnamon rolls. If you have cinnamon rolls baking in the oven, it takes you to a certain place. It's very comforting. The smell of the smell of burnt tires or gasoline may excite you or stimulate you. The smell of coffee, reminds you of morning, right? But but yeah, I mean, I think essential oils that promote calm and restfulness, they may help. So so yeah, those are just a few other methods that I've tried that I didn't mention in the last podcast. Um, but now, if you'll allow me to move on, it's not like you got a choice anyway. But I wanted to talk about loneliness. Um, loneliness. It's everyone has felt loneliness at one point. Everyone's felt sad or just alone. Excuse me, alone at one point. It may be quite literally alone, where you there's no one around, or maybe alone in the sense of you feel like misunderstood or not understood at all, where you're in a crowded room but you don't feel like you're with people or embraced by other people. And the thing with loneliness is, I believe was it an article in the New Yorker or the New York Times or something, an article somewhere. um, I want to say it was written within the past 5 years. um, Called Loneliness, like the new silent killer. I guess prolonged loneliness leads to a prolonged feelings of loneliness. That's important. Feelings of loneliness may lead to a whole host of health issues in the long run. I believe that's what the article talked about. But I want to talk about ways to combat loneliness. Of course, I mean, I'm from time, well, often. I mean, from time to time. I've been there. More often during certain periods and during the seasons, I guess. You feel more lonely than other times. Um, you know, it, Especially say you're uh you're in an office and you're disgruntled. You don't want to interact or with people that you, unless you like totally have to. There's maybe feelings of loneliness there. Or say you work night shift, graveyard shift, where say security or whatnot, while everyone is down for the night, you're up and you're essentially by yourself. You know. Um, Now, how would you combat that? How would you fix that, or what would be a remedy for loneliness? I mean, well, if you feel truly alone, like you have no one to talk to, or you don't interact with people that, or have meaningful interactions with other people on a daily basis. Maybe you could uh go out there. The first thing that comes to mind, and I know this well, but places like assisted living facilities or convalescent homes or nursing homes or whatever, they're always taking volunteers for people to interact with the residents. That's a way to meet new people, and kind of and to kind of take away from the loneliness for a bit, because I can assure you that these elderly, they may feel lonely themselves, and would want or would love to have someone just to listen to them or talk to them. To be fair, you go to one of these places, a rest home, retirement home, where the elderly are at, and you may hear or learn about someone's life who lived in a different period of time than you. Maybe their experiences may open your eyes to what the world used to be like. Um, I've spoken to war veterans, and I've spoken to um, uh, people who've worked in places like government, or have worked during the civil rights movement, and they all have interesting stories to tell, and maybe from a perspective that you never thought about, or never cared to thought about, you know and you're doing yourself a service and them a service, a community service, by fighting both of your loneliness, and meeting together every now and again. Maybe you could do something like that. If you don't want to, maybe if you don't want to go out and interact with people, that's fine. I mean, things like that would be an ideal way, but maybe you're in an unfortunate situation where you don't want to interact with people. Well, I mean, something as simple as putting bird feeders out on your porch, and the birds always do come. Maybe a hummingbird feeder. The birds always do come. Even if you live in the suburbs, the birds come. Little finches or willow or sparrows or whatnot. Little tiny birds that will come by your feeder, and maybe it'll be the same couple birds every time. And just seeing life, just seeing nature and another animal, uh, being nourished by what you've provided. It makes you feel good, and may, if only briefly, take away from loneliness. Um, this the same thing goes for maybe just like laying out some fruit. So the squirrels or the chipmunks or whatever tiny mammals that reside where you are. You can see those things. Maybe you're not fond of birds. Maybe you've seen uh maybe you've seen that Hitchcock film too many times. Well, maybe squirrels. Little squirrels, and if squirrels are, and oftentimes it's the same squirrels that come, and if you keep feeding it, it'll the same ones will keep coming, and then you have yourself a little pet, a little wild pet, I guess. Especially around where I live, the squares have been a lot. The squirrels, excuse me, have been a lot more brazen. They've been a lot more willing to approach you, which is kind of scary, I guess. I mean, with they can bite and may carry diseases, but at the same time, it's you feel like you have your little buddy there, and that may take away from loneliness. Of course, you know, of course, to completely, or to better remove loneliness, it's ideal that you interact with like-minded people. If you interact with like-minded people, or people with similar interests, it'll you'll feel a lot more a part of something, you know, a part of a team or group, and there'll be a lot more us rather than just you. Just simple things, simple meetups, like, I guess, book clubs, or I guess other clubs. Or maybe if you're a little bit on the athletic side, or you want to be more athletic, maybe you want to join a little recreational sport, or a, a class of some sort, maybe a cardio kickboxing class of some sort. And a lot of those groups, they do meet up weekly, And if you, of course, if you have some extra cash to spare on these classes or materials, if you say you're doing an art class or something, or a knitting class, or something, then then maybe it'd be wise to see what those have to offer you, and maybe that'll make you feel a little bit more a part of something, and remove those feelings of loneliness, if only for a while. Um, I mean, knitting's kind of something I've always kind of wanted to get into. It's kind of weird, I guess. I mean, I guess it's not very masculine, but I mean, who cares? Who cares? What's about that? I mean, you want to. It feels good, If you, I can imagine, just like an art project, it feels good if you create something that can be utilized, like say a hat or a scarf, or maybe like a pair of socks or something. If you could knit those, it'd make you feel very accomplished. Um, I mean, yeah, I think we're seeing nowadays more and more people getting back into that do-it-yourself mentality when it comes to like uh, things like clothes or or whatnot. Where people are more uh, willing to create rather than purchase. Which is good. Which is good. I mean that's fun, but of course it's time consuming. You know. Now while I'm I'm not, I don't think I have the patience or just the overall skills to make my own clothing. I've been of the I've always been of the school of thought that if you don't want a particular item, that it'd be wise, or that someone else may find use in it, right? So I do frequent places like thrift stores, secondhand stores. That's where I do most of my clothes shopping is secondhand stores. You can find everything. You can find nice sweaters, dress shirts, pants, slacks, jeans, even shoes at secondhand stores. If you don't mind uh, the fact that it was previously owned by another person. Um, and in many of these secondhand stores, you can find some good scores if you look right. You may even find designer clothing on the racks at these secondhand stores. Not just yes, common wear. You can find uh, just the other day I found just a flannel shirt that that was very lightly used. And it cost less than $10. But retail at say at a department store or whatever, it costs you know just under $50. So it saved a lot of money. Yeah, it might have been worn maybe a couple times before I bought it, but I mean there's no tears or stains or whatever. So it's new to me, and I got myself a fly piece of clothing, a flannel shirt. It looks good, fits nicely for just a fraction of the price that it would normally cost. You know, I recommend it. I recommend most people who want to save money, and have say maybe uh, half an hour to an hour of time on your hands. Go to your nearest thrift store. Go to your nearest uh, you know a secondhand store and see what you can find. You might be surprised as to the quality of clothing, or the quality of donations that that people are willing to just give away. And and you might find something. You might find yourself a $50 flannel shirt just for $10, under $10. Still pretty proud of that score, and that was a couple weeks ago. Okay, so I want to move on. I want to talk about something completely different, completely change gears. I'll get a sip of this tea here. So just the other day, I was cleaning out my file cabinet just for just old stuff to recycle, discard, shred, etc. And I found a list that I made. There's no date on it, but I believe I made it. I want to say maybe 7, 8 years ago. I wrote this list that I found just the other day of my top 10 favorite movies. Earlier I mentioned Hitchcock, and and how people are terrified of birds. Well, on this list, The Birds by Alfred Hitchcock is number one of my favorite movies. It's a little bit older. I believe it's in color. I mean, you can find it in color. I'm sure it's in color. Yeah, I don't remember if I watched it in color or black and white. I know there's a black and white version, but I'm pretty sure there's a color version as well. Yeah, and that's probably, well, Hitchcock himself he's uh he's done so many memorable films such as Rear Window, North by Northwest, Psycho, The Birds, etc. Right? I mean, everybody knows those movies, but he has a wide catalog that I haven't barely scratched the surface on, even though one of his films is in my top 10. Number two, I got Pulp Fiction. Everyone knows Pulp Fiction. Quentin Tarantino, starring John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson as two goons or hitmen. And it's an interesting story in a non-linear that it's a non-linear narrative. It's also it has Bruce Willis, Ving Rhames, uh, Uma Thurman's in it. Everybody knows. I'm pretty sure everyone knows the scene where Samuel L. Jackson's characters are reciting a Bible verse. And the iconic the suits, the black suits. And number three is Forrest Gump, starring Tom Hanks, Gary Sinise, Sally Field, Robin Wright. Right, the story of a simple man throughout history. Forrest Gump. He lives in 1940s Alabama. And he's and meets Elvis. Goes to the Vietnam War. Becomes a captain of a shrimp boat. All those things, all while he's has the same love interest throughout the whole film. A girl that he met on the bus while he was a kid with a low IQ wearing leg braces. And it's kind of interesting to see, how Forrest the character grows up. Number four is The Breakfast Club. This is one of those John Hughes movies in the 1980s. It takes place at a high school, and I believe it's 5 students are in detention. You got Judd Nelson, Emilio Estevez, right, Molly Ringwald. And then it kind of the movie begins with how how they're highlighting their differences. and then as the movie progresses, kind of tends to bring to light their similarities. It's interesting, right? Number 5 is L.A. Confidential, which I believe is a lot higher now. L.A. Confidential is a fantastic movie starring Guy Pearce, Russell Crowe, among others, Kim Basinger, among others. It's a noir, kind of like a modern noir that takes place in 1930s Los Angeles. I believe 1930s Los Angeles. It's pretty interesting. Deals with a lot of things like murder, police corruption, the use of media, and just the just journalism, and all types of factors, right? Uh, let's see. We still got time. I'll just go through this quickly. Big Fish number 6. Although I believe it should be a lot lower on the list now. I've actually only seen it once, but apparently it gave such a big impression on me that I put it in my top 10 list as high as 6. So I might need to watch it again. Number 7 is Blade Runner, the original 1980s version with Harrison Ford. I really enjoyed that movie. I watched it in a film study class in high school, and then I later watched it again. And I don't know. I've been told there's several versions of it. I forgot which version I watched, but I'm gonna need to watch it again. Maybe they said the final cut, director's cut, whatever. Right. Number 8, Fight Club. Is that a Chuck Palahniuk book novel? Right. Fight Club, starring Edward Norton and Brad Pitt. Right. It's weird, but really engaging. I highly recommend it. It's one of those bro movies, one of those dude movies. So I recommend that. Number 9 is Back to the Future, classic. Marty McFly, right? He Christopher Lloyd, amazing. Of course, with I guess technically now is the future in Back to the Future, right? Like you're talking about in real time, and they just got some details somewhat right, but the rest of it quite wrong as well. I guess they didn't take into account technology and smartphones and tablets and other devices. But incredible movie. I think that should be in everyone's top 10. It's a movie for kids and adults alike. And to round off my top 10 list, I got Top Gun, starring Tom Cruise. Now that's another bro movie. Top Gun. Well, Top Gun has a little bit more of a sentimental value because I used to watch it with my cousins. That's like the number one movie we always watched together. We all loved airplanes, and everyone wanted to be Maverick. No one wanted to be Goose. But you got Cougar, Iceman, Viper, etc. Merlin. And it's about Top Gun is like a flight school, a fighter pilot school. Where you get to be the top naval fighter pilots in the nation. The elite fighter pilot, right? And elite fighter pilots in the nation. And I believe they're making a sequel coming up. I don't know if it's in production hell or not, but it's coming. Last I heard, Tom Cruise is trying to make a second Top Gun, which is for what's 40 years after the original. So, and it's a sequel, not a remake. So, it'll be interesting to see what that's about. I'll probably watch it, to be honest. Okay, so that was my top 10 favorite films as of, I don't know, I want to say 7 or 8 years ago. Obviously, it has changed a little bit since then. I've seen more films, many more films since then. So I should make a revised list. I should keep that in mind for a future podcast. Okay. So I want to close by reading a poem of the second episode of the Insomniac's Graveyard podcast, also known as the Derek Thinks podcast. But before I get into this, I want to pimp my social media. Let you know where you can contact me. You can contact me on Twitter or Instagram. That's Derek Thinks at derickthinks, DERICKTHINKS. If you have, if you have ideas or ways that help you go to sleep, you can hit me up on my Twitter. If you have any ideas or ways that you combat loneliness, you hit me up. I'd love to know how you guys fight your bouts of loneliness. If you made a recent high quality score at the secondhand store, maybe you got yourself a fancy dress shirt or some designer jeans for just a fraction of the price. Let me know. I'd love to know what you've purchased. And if you have any dissenting opinions, or if you have any hate that you want to spew my way for my top 10 favorite movies as of 7 or 8 years ago, and you can feel free to do that. That's at derickthinks on Twitter and Instagram. DERICKTHINKS. Now, so I want to read a poem to conclude this podcast. It is by Victor Hernandez Cruz, and the poem is called Problems with Hurricanes. A campesino looked at the air and told me, with hurricanes, it's not the wind, or the noise, or the water. I'll tell you, he said. It's the mangoes, avocados, green plantains, and bananas, flying into town like projectiles. How would your family feel if they had to tell the generations that you got killed by a flying banana? Death by drowning has honor. If the wind picked you up and slammed you against a mountain boulder, this would not carry shame. But to suffer a mango smashing your skull or a plantain hitting your temple at 70 miles per hour is the ultimate disgrace. The campesino takes off his hat as a sign of respect towards the fury of the wind and says, don't worry about the noise. Don't worry about the water. Don't worry about the wind. If you're going out, beware of mangoes and all such beautiful, sweet things.